seconds. Head explodes.
Are we like in a movie right now?
If we are, I hope it's a rom-com.
Developed by Supermassive Games and published by Sony Computer Entertainment and released exclusively on the PlayStation 4 in August of 2015, it's Until Dawn. And today's episode, I'm joined by co-host Seraph, as we're going to be co-reviewing this game today.
Hello everyone. In Until Dawn, you join a group of 8 teenagers as they go to a mountainside lodge to just have general fun. But things go sinister when a prank goes horribly wrong, and 2 of their group disappear. Now, a year later, one of them has invited the rest of them up in memoriam, and to generally have fun because that's what the other 2 would have wanted.
And what could go wrong? That one friend who lost both of his sisters suddenly decides to invite everyone back down a year later on the anniversary date of his sister's disappearance. And then, sure enough, things decide to go from good to worse really quickly.
I'm going to give you 10 seconds. 9,
No,
8,
no, 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 no,
7.
please, no!
Sam!
And on the gameplay side of things, it's your typical kind of action-adventure game. You're exploring around the environments, there's tons of quick-time events, you're making choices, dialogue options, there's stats based around how your friendships are doing, your relationships and things like that.
And throughout the game, you view the events of the game from the perspective of one of the 6 remaining teenagers.
And then sure enough, like any good B-horror movie, they all split up, they go into different groups, different patterns, and then suddenly the typical kind of slasher killer guy appears.
Now, we're not going to give anything away here, but the game does take quite a sinister turn, and you'll find that there's more to what's going on than meets the eye.
Yeah, it starts off with a typical kind of slasher horror kind of vibe going on, and suddenly just things start going wrong from all of their different perspectives. And the game is also broken up into episodes, similar to kind of a TV show with even a previously on aspect to it, and even like a TV style introduction to the start of the game, with some nice music going for it as well.
But is it any good? Find out in The Good.
You psyched yet? You don't look psyched yet.
I am so psyched right now.
It's like a little adventure, a sexcapade.
Now, for me, probably one of the best aspects to this game is the great story behind it. Obviously, for a very narrative-driven, focused experience, I feel like the whole choose-your-own-adventure kind of thing works really well with a horror game, especially like a movie slasher kind of thing. And the game itself takes plenty of cues from 80s slasher flicks, and it works really well. And all the choices, the butterfly effect system, you can see the different choices you make and how they play out. It can affect the way people interact, things like that. Whether they die or live, you can get a certain character later on in the game killed based on bad decisions he can make.
No, I'll also agree. Story is very important when it comes to a game like Until Dawn. The main reason being because there's such a heavy narrative drive to it. Unless it grabs your attention within the first hour or so of the game, it gives you an incentive to keep going. And I do like the idea of the butterfly system, the butterfly effect system. So there's an example where you're checking the basement and you're given a bat, and by putting the bat down, it could come in handy for you later on in the game when you're in dire trouble.
Yeah, and then later on in the game, during a segment where the psycho killer is chasing after you, later on you actually find that bat again, and if you did find that bat earlier, you can pick it up and use it against him, as opposed to if you never found it, you have no choice but to either run or hide. The little things like that. And one other beautiful thing the system does well is the choices somewhat matter in a sense. There's a heavy emphasis on choice, and some of the choices are very major, but some of the choices are pretty minor, and they don't really go into detail as to what choices are going to be major. So you gotta be really careful with whatever choice you make in this game.
As some of the choices could even be a life or death situation for the characters.
Right, and probably one of the best things about that you mentioned earlier, that the story usually in a game has to hook you within the first hour. For me personally, in this game, I hated the characters at first. They're all pretty much kind of typical tropes, all big stereotype kind of characters. You got your jock, you got your kind of bitchy, kind of popular high school girl, you got just a mixture of all these different stereotypes. And over the progression of the game, they all kind of mature, and they actually get some really good character development. By the end of the game, like for example, Mike, he started off as kind of the typical prankster, kind of jockey kind of guy. He wasn't really, like when I first saw him, I did not like him, like at all. But by like the end of the game, he's essentially like the go-to guy. By the end of the game, I think Mike kind of becomes like the guy, like really matures into that, and he fits it well. He's a completely different person by the end of the game.
You could essentially say that Mike is the Nathan Drake of the game. He starts off, as 16-bit said, as your typical jock. He plays pranks, but by the end of it, he becomes a very serious, a very well fleshed out character, and the progression across the course of the game, it really shows just how much development he gets.
I don't think this applies for every character though. There's a few characters that we'll talk about later that don't really have any progression whatsoever. There are some characters that throughout the game, despite being in the game a lot, don't really develop at all. Like there's a few characters I did not like through the whole game, specifically Emily. She starts off kind of bitchy, and then by the end of the game she's still bitchy. Not a fan of Emily too much, but you know, they obviously gonna have some characters you may or may not like, so you can try and possibly kill them. You know, that's the beauty of this game. It's all about choice. You don't have to keep them alive.
I'm the one who's scared.
I'm sorry. Emily, I didn't know what was going to happen. None of us know.
There's no excuse. There's no excuse
Please,
for
Emily,
this.
please, just try to understand.
Understand the palm of my hand, bitch.
And another thing I really liked when it came down to character development is the character interaction and development between Chris and Ashley. Now, those two characters, it's heavily implied, or it even states when they're introduced, that they have a crush on one another. And over the course of the game, you can either choose to strengthen their relationship or destroy it.
And as for the controls themselves and the gameplay, one thing I really did like, the QuickTime events, you know, they're there obviously. Not a lot of people like QuickTime events, but for a game like this, they're pretty fair. They give you a good chance of time, in my opinion, to really jump on them. I found myself only rarely ever screwing up, but when you do screw up, you can definitely get screwed over by it. One thing I really did like was the good use of the DualShock 4 and its motion light sensor thing, that little light bar on the controller. There's a few segments in the game where you have to hide, and you get what's called a don't move segment. And essentially you can't move your controller, otherwise you'll get spotted or anything like that. And I felt this was a surprisingly really good use of the actual the light bar itself.
Yeah, in regards to the QuickTime events, I also felt it really added to the atmosphere of the game, because it essentially it forces you to make snap decisions. So whether you choose to barricade a door or choose to run and hide, that sort of thing, it basically allows you to keep thinking on your feet. It doesn't always give you that freedom of time to sort of work things out. Another thing I also liked was the amount of collectibles that you found throughout the game. So throughout the game you've got totems, which essentially tell you whether someone's about to die or whether you're about to die. It's very ambiguous though on how it sort of shows that. Other ones, it might show you where certain items are, who you should give the items to, or even good things that come out of positive interactions between other characters or positive choices you can make. But on top of that, what I also liked was the collectibles that you find in regards to Beth and Hannah, who are the twins that disappeared at the start of the game, as well as the mystery man that seems to be stalking you across the mountain, and an event that happened back in 1952. Each collectible builds up a backstory in regards to these characters, things that happened before the game that eventually lead up to the events of the game.
Yeah, and it all builds the universe really well. There's plenty of collectible items such as newspapers, little tidbits you can find, and it works surprisingly well. I thought it was really well executed. But you know what's not well executed?
The bad.
Hey.
What?
Hey.
What the hell?
Boom. You just got mugged.
What?
Now, probably right off the bat, there's some pre-order DLC in this game, and the pre-order DLC itself is actually kind of cut right out of the game itself. It's pretty obvious. There's a certain character in this game by the name of Matt, and there's a certain segment where him and his girlfriend Emily kind of go wander off to go grab bags. And this is near the beginning of the game, before the Psycho Killer is even around. And they considered this pre-order DLC, them walking around and finding, I think, like a bloody pig head or something. And I just felt like cutting that out of the game was really pointless as pure DLC. And not a big fan of that. And probably the next, like, one of the big things you noted was the relationship status. Despite being pretty decent with characters like Chris and Ashley, for everyone else, it's kind of useless.
Especially when it comes to characters that barely interact with one another. And you could also say the same with the stats for the characters, whether they're charitable, they're honest, or courageous. It doesn't really play a huge role as far as I've seen throughout the game, because you can choose how characters react in particular scenes, and that can either increase or decrease those stats. But I've never seen that the stats become an important part of future decisions, or even a particular action because your stat isn't high enough. I feel that the relationship system is more cosmetic than anything. It doesn't really play a huge role whatsoever.
Probably one of the worst aspects of this game, probably the biggest offender, is the illusion of choice. Despite talking about the choices we mentioned earlier in the game and about how the decisions you make can affect a character's life or death, upon replaying the game, we blasted through the game roughly 3 times. We 100%ed it, we platinumed the game, we got every single collectible. If there's one thing I did notice upon replaying the game, there's a really good illusion of choice. Like, the choices you make, you feel like you're changing things. But upon replaying it, you quickly find out that not so much. It's really heavily scripted to seem that way. And without giving anything away too much, it feels like everyone's supposed to die, and they build off of that. So when someone's alive, for example, when they should have died, during a certain cutscene or two, or throughout the game, they'll kind of just stand there, like they're not even supposed to be there, so it's implied that they should have probably died. And it's a really good illusion choice, but that's the problem. It's an illusion of that. You're not really making huge choices in this game.
The illusion sort of wears off when you play it the second time.
Choices that seem really obvious are obvious for a reason, because that's how the game's supposed to play out. And when you break that chain, nothing much changes.
Throughout the game, certain characters have very little involvement in the story altogether. The one I'll let off the hook in this example would be Jessica, because due to certain events in the game, she's knocked out for most of it. But the character in question I want to sort of point the finger at here is Matt. After escaping a certain section of the game, he plays a very little role whatsoever until much, much later.
Yeah, if you manage to keep Matt alive to this point in the game, he kind of just vanishes. Like, throughout the rest of the game, you don't really get much out of him. And then near the end of the game, he kind of just appears and then shows up for the ending. That's really about it, and it's kind of disappointing. It leads into what we talked about earlier, where if you make a choice like this, where it's pretty obvious Matt is supposed to be dead, when he's not dead, it kind of throws a kink in things.
Another thing that we weren't particularly too keen on in the game was the camera angles try to achieve a cinematic experience, but they felt more of a hindrance than anything else.
Yeah, I really felt like playing this game with a third-person over-the-shoulder camera wouldn't change anything. There's a few camera shots where they're obviously going for a tracking feel. They're obviously trying to attempt to achieve that feeling of being a slasher movie, and I appreciate that to an extent. But the effect quickly wears off, and throughout the game, the camera will give you more trouble than anything. And not only that, the controls themselves are slightly tankish. They're really stiff, depending on the camera angles, how you move. So I've had a number of moments in the game where I'm walking down towards something, and then suddenly the camera shifts, and then suddenly my character's turning around because my analog stick is still going in that direction. Things like that were kind of annoying.
So now we've got that out of the way, let's move on to
the ugly.
Sick. That's what I say.
Where we discuss the graphics, technical aspects, soundtrack, and general presentation of the game. Now, probably one of my favorite things graphically about this game, mind you, this is a very good looking game. This is a PlayStation 4 exclusive. It ran well, it runs in, I believe, in 1080p. But and overall, the TV presentation as well is done really well. Overall, graphically, it's a great game to look at. The character models are absolutely incredible. But not only that, the facial animation, the mocap they did for this game, looks believable. Like, it looks like a real human. It looks great. It kind of reminds me of LA Noire in a sense.
another good thing. A good way to check this out is if you leave the controller just for a brief moment. It zooms in on the character's face and you can see the detail and you can see the attention that they've put into the emotions, the expressions,
And one other thing I did notice, the environments themselves also looked really great. And one little technology moment kind of was the snow. When you're walking, you can actually see your footprints behind you. But not only that, the footprints will actually stay there. I've come back to areas, and you can like see your footprints from when you've been walking around.
Not only do you see your own footprints though, you see other footprints that have been made by the character that's following you, or even by wee animals like the squirrel at the start of the game. But another thing I thought was really well done and was good attention to detail was that in one stage of the game you're inside a theatre room or a cinema room, whatever you like to call it. But inside this room there's these movie posters on the wall, advertising movies such as The Innkeepers, Bitter Feast, Stakeland and House of the Devil. Those are very subtle references because one of the writers of the game, Larry Fessenden, he's the one who actually produced, or is produced under his banner, Scareflix. The movies that are on the wall are actually real horror movies that you can go out and watch.
You can definitely tell there's a lot of love for slasher movies and horror movies, and it's definitely shown in this game. There's all of the favorite tropes that you'll see. Either people tripping on things while being chased if you strip a quick time event. All the little details like that really adds to the overall presentation of the game.
Throughout our initial 6-hour playthrough and the remaining 6 hours we spent on cleaning up, getting all the trophies, getting everyone killed, etc., I never really noticed any sort of bugs or glitches throughout the game.
And yeah, during our 3 playthroughs over the game, yeah, we remained bug glitch free. We had no freezing, crashes, none of that, and it ran great. And that's always obviously a plus in a game like this. And speaking of our runs, you can actually check out the all death run on our channel right now. It's been uploaded recently. So if, spoiler warnings obviously, if you want to see our 3rd playthrough of the game, I believe, which included everybody dying, you can check that out. It starts from chapter 6 and onwards. Be advised, there are spoilers. But with that being said, let's go into our final thoughts of the game.
Okay, sounds good.
Get the hell away from me!
No. Live and learn! Live and learn.
Now, me personally, I think this is an absolutely fantastic game. It's probably one of my favorite PlayStation 4 exclusives I've played to date. Keep in mind, I've yet to play things like Bloodborne and stuff like that, but this is probably my favorite PS4 exclusive. I went in thinking it wouldn't be much, and I came out very surprised at how well done the story was, that there is a big twist. I'm not going to give anything away. It takes a much darker and more sinister turn, I'd say, in the second half of the game, and I personally thought it was really well executed. And yeah, it's an effective horror game. There's plenty of moments where we jumped out of our seats almost playing it, and overall, I had a blast playing through this. Even replaying it, despite some of our issues, it's still an absolutely fun game to play. Whether or not you're keeping them all alive, or getting them killed, or just doing a blind run. I highly recommend if you're playing this, don't look up any guides, don't look up any walkthroughs, ignore everything, turn your phone off, turn your computer off, and just sit down and play this, and you'll have a blast. But what are your thoughts?
Well, I'm not a very good person when it comes to horror games, but I thought Until Dawn did a very good job, had a very engaging story. The collectibles, building up that backstory, answered a lot of questions that I had throughout the game, and it's always good to know sort of how these events and how these things came to pass. And for an exclusive, and I have played a few exclusives such as Bloodborne and The Last of Us, even though Last of Us was on PlayStation 3, but it really stands out. I like the whole idea of the butterfly effect. How even a simple choice or even a simple thing you do in the game can have severe consequences later, or even how characters interact with one another could even affect the life and death situation. As I said before, the game does dull your perception when you replay it, as the jump scares aren't as scary. But there were a few times where, even though we were expecting it, it still got us. And as 16-Bit said, the game takes a very dark and sinister turn halfway through the game. I'll also agree with that as well. It's very interesting and it really gets your blood pumping. And I think if you manage to survive the first half of the game, the second half will really be the thing to look out for.
But now,
it's time for the rating.